Look at you. A black woman wearing a bargain store coat actually thinks she belongs in the middle of Maple Ridge like everyone else. Officer Brendan Kane sneered, his voice dripping with contempt as he deliberately stepped into Senator Celine Voss's path. Before she could answer, he slapped the steaming paper coffee cup straight out of her hands with the back of his gloved hand. The cup exploded against the sidewalk, sending scorching coffee splashing across her navy coat and soaking the front of her blouse. A stunned silence swept through the crowd. Kane folded his arms and laughed. Now that's exactly where people like you belong, covered in the mess you bring wherever you go. He took one slow step closer, looking Celine up and down with open disdain. You really thought that, because you walked in here with your head held high, people would mistake you for somebody important around here. Respect isn't something you can pretend to wear. You so The officers behind him chuckled. Kane wasn't finished. Do yourself a favor, turn around, clean yourself up, and stop wasting everyone's time. This town has no room for troublemakers who think confidence alone can buy them respect. Several officers standing behind him burst into laughter, while nervous bystanders exchanged uneasy glances. One young man instinctively raised his phone to record, but another deputy barked, "Put it away unless you want trouble." Celine looked calmly at the coffee dripping from her sleeves. She neither argued nor stepped back. With remarkable composure, she lifted her eyes and quietly asked, "Officer, would you please tell me your badge number?" Kane smirked arrogantly. "Go ahead and complain. Around here, nobody has more authority than we do." What Kane didn't know was that within moments, 3 government SUVs would pull onto Main Street, and the truth about the quiet black woman standing before him would bring his entire department to the brink of collapse. If this opening made you angry, stay with us because justice is closer than Kane could ever imagine. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is in your city. And if you believe no one should ever be judged by appearance or prejudice, subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the powerful ending waiting just ahead. The coffee dripping from Celine Voss's coat left dark stains across the navy fabric, but her expression remained remarkably calm. Around her, the afternoon bustle on Main Street slowed to an uncomfortable crawl. People glanced at one another, unsure whether to intervene or quietly walk away. In Maple Ridge, everyone knew that crossing Officer Brendan Kane usually came with consequences. Celine reached into her worn leather tote, removed a neatly folded handkerchief, and gently dabbed the hot coffee from her sleeves. She neither cursed nor raised her voice. Years of public service had taught her that a person's true character often revealed itself most clearly when someone else believed they held absolute power. Kane mistook her composure for weakness. "What?" He scoffed loudly. "Nothing to say now?" Celine looked directly into his eyes. "I asked for your badge number." The officer laughed so hard that 2 deputies standing behind him joined in. "You still don't get it, do you?" Kane replied. "My badge number isn't your biggest problem. Your biggest problem is thinking anyone around here is going to take your side." Several people standing outside the coffee shop lowered their heads. An elderly couple quietly gathered their shopping bags and hurried away. A mother gently pulled her daughter closer, whispering that it was time to leave. No one wanted to become Kane's next target. Inside the coffee shop, the young manager, Lila Grant, had watched everything through the front window. She tightened her grip on the counter until her knuckles turned white. "I can't just stand here," she murmured. One of her employees grabbed her arm. "Lila, please don't." "If nobody says anything," Lila answered softly, "then we're telling him this is acceptable." She pushed open the cafe door and stepped outside. "Officer Kane." Kane slowly turned. "What?" "She paid for her coffee a short time ago. I served her myself. She hasn't broken any law." For a brief second, silence settled over the sidewalk. Kane's eyes narrowed. "You questioning police business?" "I'm telling you what I witnessed." He stepped toward Lila until only a few feet separated them. "You want to keep managing this little coffee shop?" he asked coldly. "Then stay behind your counter and mind your own business." Lila swallowed but refused to move. Everyone here saw what happened. Kane glanced across the crowd. The dozens of witnesses who had gasped only moments earlier suddenly found the pavement far more interesting than his face. Not a single person spoke. A smug smile spread across Kane's lips. "See that?" he said, turning back toward Celine. "Funny how nobody seems eager to defend you now." Celine could feel the fear hanging over the street. It wasn't simply fear of one officer. It was the fear that came from years of believing complaints disappeared. Witnesses stayed silent and nothing ever changed. She knew that feeling. Long before law school and long before entering public office, she had watched her own father endure similar humiliation after being falsely accused of shoplifting in a neighboring county. The accusation had eventually been disproven, but the damage to his dignity remained with him for the rest of his life. That memory had shaped every decision she had made since. Today's visit to Maple Ridge wasn't accidental. For months, anonymous complaints had poured into her office describing racial profiling, intimidation, and missing disciplinary records inside the Maple Ridge Police Department. Victims described nearly identical encounters with one particular officer, Kane. Instead of announcing an official investigation, Celine had proposed something different. I want to see how ordinary people are treated when no cameras are expected, she had told Governor Conrad Hale. The governor had agreed. Only a handful of trusted officials knew where she would be that afternoon. Everyone else believed Senator Celine Voss was attending a legislative committee meeting far away. Back on Main Street, Kane folded his arms. So, he mocked, are you finally ready to apologize for wasting my time? Celine looked genuinely puzzled. For what? For creating a disturbance. You created the disturbance. The corners of Kane's mouth tightened. I can change that report with one sentence. Before Celine could respond, another patrol vehicle rolled to the curb. Police Chief Victor Harlan climbed out, adjusting his uniform cap as though responding to nothing more serious than a parking complaint. He glanced briefly at Kane's stained gloves before looking toward Celine. What seems to be the problem? Kane answered before anyone else could speak. This woman became confrontational after refusing lawful instructions. Celine calmly interrupted. Chief, that's not what happened. Harlan barely acknowledged her. My officer has served this department for years. And I've been standing here for only a short time, Celine replied evenly. That doesn't change what your officer did. Harlan's expression hardened. Ma'am, if Officer Kane says you were causing a disturbance, I'm inclined to believe him. Lila stepped forward again. Chief, that's not true. We all... Harlan raised one hand without even looking at her. I wasn't speaking to you. The dismissal struck Lila harder than she expected. Celine noticed it immediately. Power, she thought, often revealed itself not through shouting, but through deciding whose voice deserved to be ignored. Harlan turned back toward Kane. Anything else? Kane nodded. She demanded my badge number. Harlan almost smiled. Did she? Celine answered before Kane could continue. I requested accountability. The chief's eyes lingered on her stained coat. Perhaps next time you'll choose a better attitude when interacting with law enforcement. Several deputies laughed quietly. Celine slowly folded her coffee-soaked handkerchief and placed it back inside her tote. She had heard enough. Without another word, she reached into an inside pocket and removed a small plain cell phone that looked years old. She pressed a single contact already waiting on the screen. The call connected almost instantly. Everything has been documented, Celine said calmly. Only 7 words. No explanation, no raised voice, no threats. She ended the call and slipped the phone away. Kane burst into laughter. Calling your lawyer? Celine met his gaze. No. Your family? No. Then who exactly did you call? For the first time since the confrontation began, a faint smile appeared on Celine Voss's face. You'll find out soon enough. Less than 2 miles away, 3 black government SUVs abruptly turned off the highway toward Maple Ridge. Inside the lead vehicle, Governor Conrad Hale lowered the investigative report in his hands after hearing the brief phone call over a secured line. His face darkened. Drive faster, he ordered. The convoy accelerated toward Main Street. Officer Brendan Kane, meanwhile, had absolutely no idea that the quiet woman standing before him had just set into motion the most devastating moment of his career. Officer Brendan Kane mistook Celine Voss's quiet confidence for surrender. He folded his arms, rocking slightly on his heels as though the confrontation had already been won. See? He said loudly, making sure everyone on Main Street could hear him. That's what happens every time. People make a scene, then they realize they picked the wrong officer. A few nervous chuckles came from behind the line of deputies. Celine remained still. She neither defended herself nor explained why she had come to Maple Ridge. Her silence irritated Kane far more than an argument would have. What? He mocked. Lost your courage? I've said everything that needed to be said, Celine answered. No, Kane replied with a grin. You haven't admitted you were wrong. Celine looked calmly toward the gathering crowd. I wasn't wrong. Those 3 words caused Kane's smile to disappear. He stepped closer until only inches separated them. You know what your problem is? He asked. You think wearing confidence makes people forget who you are. Celine held his stare. I know exactly who I am. The answer sounded simple, yet something about it unsettled him. Before he could respond, Chief Victor Harlan glanced toward the growing crowd outside the café. More pedestrians had stopped. Drivers slowed their cars. Several people watched from nearby storefront windows. Harlan knew the scene was attracting too much attention. Officer Kane, he said quietly, finish this. Kane ignored him. He turned back toward Celine. All right, he announced. Let's see some identification. Celine reached into her leather tote without hesitation. She handed him a Georgia driver's license. Kane barely glanced at it before laughing. Celine Voss. He looked from the card to her face. Nice address. Then, without warning, he tossed the license onto the wet sidewalk. The plastic card landed in a puddle of spilled coffee. Several people gasped. Celine slowly looked down. She had encountered insults before, but disrespect for basic dignity never became easier to witness. You dropped my identification, she said evenly. No, Kane answered. I returned it. It's on the ground. Then pick it up. The words echoed across the silent street. Even Deputy Rafael Soto shifted uncomfortably beside the patrol car. He had worked with Kane for years. He had seen unnecessary traffic stops. He had seen people intimidated into silence. But this felt different. This woman had remained respectful from the very beginning. Still, Soto said nothing. His badge suddenly felt heavier than usual. Across the sidewalk, Lila Grant could no longer contain herself. This has gone too far. She hurried toward the license. Before she could bend down, Kane blocked her path. I wouldn't do that. Why not? Because this is now evidence. Lila frowned. Evidence of what? Interference with a police investigation. You don't even have an investigation. I do if I say I do. The sentence chilled everyone within earshot. Celine watched the exchange carefully. Months of anonymous complaints suddenly became real people with frightened faces. This wasn't merely about one arrogant officer. It was about a culture that had taught decent people to remain silent. Lila looked toward Chief Harlan. Chief, please. Harlan sighed impatiently. Miss Grant, go back inside your café. Officer Kane assaulted a customer. Harlan's expression hardened. That's enough. You haven't even asked anyone else what happened. I trust my officer. What about the witnesses? Harlan glanced at the crowd. If anyone has something important to report, they know where the station is. Everyone understood what that really meant. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The silence wasn't agreement. It was fear. Celine finally bent down herself. She calmly picked up her driver's license, removed a clean tissue from her tote, and wiped away the coffee before placing it carefully back into her wallet. Every movement remained deliberate, controlled, graceful. Kane laughed again. You've got patience. Celine looked directly at him. My parents taught me that losing control only helps people who have already lost theirs. For a split second, Kane's jaw tightened. The remark wasn't loud. It wasn't insulting, yet somehow it felt like she had exposed something he wanted hidden. Trying to regain control, he pointed toward her tote. Open the bag. Celine paused. Is there a legal reason? I don't need to explain myself. The Constitution says otherwise. Several deputies exchanged quick glances. Chief Harlan stepped forward. Ma'am, refusing a lawful request could make matters worse. Celine answered politely. I have never refused a lawful request. Harlan frowned. So open it. I'll gladly comply once you're able to explain the legal basis for searching my personal property. Kane laughed loudly. Listen to her. He looked toward the deputies. She thinks she's a lawyer. Celine didn't react. Instead, she quietly asked, Officer Kane, have I threatened anyone? No. Have I resisted you? No. Have I committed any crime? Kane hesitated. The pause lasted barely a second, but everyone noticed. He quickly recovered. I don't need a crime to know when something feels suspicious. Celine nodded slowly. So suspicion has replaced evidence. Neither Kane nor Harlan answered. Just then, a distant convoy siren echoed faintly through downtown Maple Ridge. It wasn't loud. Most people barely noticed it, but Sierra Blake, a veteran television reporter driving back from another assignment, looked into her rearview mirror and frowned. 3 identical black government SUVs, state security escorts, no emergency lights, no local police markings. They were heading straight toward Main Street. Sierra instinctively reached for the camera resting on the passenger seat. Something big is happening, she whispered. Back outside the cafe, Kane still had no idea. He stepped even closer to Celine, lowering his voice so only she could hear. You should have walked away when you had the chance. Celine's expression never changed. I have learned that walking away from injustice only guarantees someone else will face it tomorrow. Before Kane could answer, the convoy turned onto Main Street. Every conversation stopped. Every eye shifted toward the approaching black SUVs. And for the very first time that afternoon, Officer Brendan Kane felt a faint, unfamiliar sensation creeping into the back of his mind. Uncertainty. The 3 black SUVs rolled to a smooth stop less than 30 yards from the coffee shop. No flashing lights, no sirens, only silence. Every conversation along Main Street faded as 4 men and 2 women in dark business suits stepped out with disciplined precision. Their expressions were unreadable, their movements deliberate. They looked less like politicians and more like people accustomed to solving problems that ordinary citizens never knew existed. Officer Brendan Kane glanced toward them before letting out a dismissive laugh. Probably some state inspectors looking for lunch. The deputies behind him laughed with him. Celine Voss said nothing. She simply watched the newcomers from the corner of her eye. One suited man briefly made eye contact with her before giving an almost imperceptible nod. No one else noticed. Kane certainly didn't. He turned back toward Celine, determined to prove he was still in control. "You know what?" he said loudly. "I am getting tired of your attitude." Celine answered calmly. "My attitude has been respectful from the beginning." "No," Kane snapped. "It's been arrogant." He jabbed a finger toward her chest. "You've questioned my authority in front of everyone standing here. I questioned your actions. Same difference." "No," Celine replied quietly. "Authority is earned by serving the public. It isn't protected by humiliating them." Those words landed harder than any insult. Several people in the crowd exchanged uneasy glances. Even Deputy Rafael Soto lowered his eyes. Chief Victor Harlan sensed the mood shifting. He stepped beside Kane and spoke just loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Ma'am, this encounter can still end peacefully." Celine looked at him. "I've wanted it to end peacefully from the very beginning." "Then stop challenging my officers. I asked for accountability." Harlan's face hardened. "And now you're delaying police business." Celine tilted her head slightly. "What police business?" For the first time, Harlan had no immediate answer. Kane quickly stepped back into the conversation. "Chief, she's refusing to cooperate." Celine looked directly at him. "I handed you my identification. You argued. I asked lawful questions. You embarrassed an officer. I asked for your badge number after you threw hot coffee on me." A murmur rippled through the growing crowd. Sierra Blake, the television reporter who had just parked across the street, quietly switched on her camera. Years in journalism had taught her that the most important moments usually began before anyone realized history was unfolding. She kept filming. Chief Harlan noticed the camera almost immediately. "You." Sierra looked up. "Stop recording." Sierra calmly held up her press credentials. "I'm a journalist. This is an active police matter, which makes it a matter of public interest." Harlan took one slow step forward. "I'm asking you politely." Sierra didn't lower the camera. "And I'm exercising rights protected by the Constitution." The tension on the sidewalk thickened. People who had been afraid to record suddenly realized a member of the press was standing among them. Several phones quietly appeared again. Kane saw them. His patience evaporated. "Enough." He strode toward Celine, grabbed the strap of her worn leather tote, and yanked it sharply from her shoulder. The bag crashed onto the sidewalk. Its contents spilled across the concrete. A notebook, a small bottle of medication, reading glasses, a folded umbrella, a paperback Bible with worn edges, a leather notebook secured by an elastic band. Nothing expensive, nothing suspicious, nothing remotely threatening. Kane stared for a moment, disappointed. He had expected to find something he could use. Instead, he found the ordinary belongings of a woman who appeared to be exactly who she claimed to be. The silence became almost unbearable. Celine slowly knelt on the pavement. Before she could gather her belongings, Lila Grant hurried forward. "I'll help." Kane blocked her once again. "Nobody touches anything." Lila's voice shook with anger. "She didn't deserve this." Kane shrugged. "Life isn't fair." Celine reached for her glasses. One lens had cracked from hitting the sidewalk. She held them in her hand for a brief moment before placing them carefully back into their case. Not once did she complain. Sierra captured every second through her camera. Chief Harlan walked closer. "You searched her bag for no legal reason," Sierra said. Harlan ignored her. Instead, he looked down at Celine. "If you cooperate from this point forward, perhaps we can avoid additional misunderstandings." Celine slowly stood, brushing dust from one knee. "There has been no misunderstanding." Harlan frowned. "What do you mean?" "I understand perfectly." She looked first at Kane, then at Harlan, then at the deputies standing silently behind them. "I understand exactly how people have been treated here." For the first time all afternoon, Kane's confidence wavered. There was something unsettling about the certainty in her voice. She didn't sound frightened. She sounded as though she had finally confirmed something she had suspected long before arriving. At that exact moment, one of the suited officials crossed the street. He stopped several feet behind Celine without interrupting. He quietly pressed a finger against a discreet earpiece. "Package confirmed," he said softly. The words were too quiet for the crowd to hear, but Celine heard them. She gave no visible reaction. Kane noticed the man only now. "Can I help you?" he asked impatiently. The official offered a courteous smile. "In a moment, officer." Kane frowned. "I'm speaking to you now." The man remained perfectly composed. "And I'll gladly answer when the appropriate person arrives." Kane scoffed. "What does that even mean?" Before the official could respond, another black SUV door opened. A tall figure stepped out. Every suited official immediately straightened. One by one, they adjusted their jackets. No one spoke. No one moved. Chief Victor Harlan suddenly felt his stomach tighten. He recognized the state seal on the arriving vehicle. His face lost its color. "Kane," he whispered. But the officer was too busy glaring at Celine to notice. What? Kane muttered. Harlan swallowed hard. I think we've just made a very serious mistake. Kane turned toward the convoy with an irritated sigh. Then he saw the unmistakable insignia mounted on the front fender of the lead SUV, the governor's official vehicle, and it had stopped directly in front of Celine Voss. The moment Governor Conrad Hale's official seal came into view, the atmosphere on Main Street changed completely. The laughter vanished. The deputies instinctively straightened their uniforms. Chief Victor Harlan's breathing became shallow. Only Officer Brendan Kane remained oblivious. He looked from the governor's SUV to Celine Voss and let out a dismissive chuckle. So what? He muttered. The governor isn't here for her. No one answered. The rear passenger door opened. Governor Conrad Hale stepped onto the sidewalk, accompanied by Claire Brennan, his chief of staff, Julian Crow, director of the governor's Special Investigations Unit, and Nora Ellison, the administration's chief legal counsel. Their eyes swept across the scene, the spilled coffee, Celine's stained coat, the cracked eyeglasses, the contents of the leather tote still scattered across the sidewalk. Sierra Blake continued filming without missing a second. Claire Brennan quietly whispered, "Exactly as Senator Voss described." Julian Crow nodded. "And exactly as the complaints documented." Governor Hale's jaw tightened. He walked past Kane without acknowledging him and stopped directly in front of Celine. For several long seconds, neither of them spoke. Then the governor looked down at the coffee stains covering her coat. "I'm sorry we arrived a few minutes too late." Celine offered a faint smile. "You arrived when the truth had already revealed itself." Those standing nearby exchanged confused glances. Kane frowned. Governor Hale slowly turned towards him. "Officer Kane." Kane immediately forced a confident smile. "I wasn't expecting a visit today." "I can see that." The governor's calm tone carried far more weight than shouting ever could. Chief Harlan hurried forward. "Governor Hale, this is simply a misunderstanding. My officer was responding to suspicious behavior." Julian Crow immediately opened a thick folder. "Interesting." Harlan stopped talking. Julian calmly continued. "Our office received 23 citizen complaints against Officer Brendan Kane during recent months." The street became completely silent. Julian turned another page. 14 complaints involving unlawful stops. Another page, 6 allegations of racial profiling. Another, 3 allegations involving unnecessary use of force. Harlan forced a smile. "Governor, anonymous complaints don't prove misconduct." Nora Ellison finally spoke. "They don't." She looked toward Celine. "But today's evidence certainly helps." Kane's confidence began to crack. He pointed toward Celine. "This woman refused to cooperate." Governor Hale asked only one question. "Did she?" Kane nodded. "She argued with me." Celine quietly answered. "I asked him why he wanted to search my belongings." The governor looked toward Chief Harlan. "Did your officer have probable cause?" Harlan hesitated. "He believed?" "I asked whether he had probable cause." Harlan remained silent. Nora Ellison wrote a brief note inside her folder. Sierra noticed every expression, every hesitation, every nervous glance. Her camera captured all of it. Across the sidewalk, more residents slowly gathered. Some recognized the governor. Others simply sensed that years of fear might finally be reaching a turning point. Governor Hale looked toward Lila Grant. "Were you working inside the cafe?" "Yes, sir." "Did you witness the incident?" "I witnessed all of it." "Were you the employee who served Senator Voss?" "Yes." "What happened?" Lila took a slow breath. Her hands trembled. She looked toward Kane, then toward Harlan. For years, she had watched neighbors lower their voices whenever police officers entered the cafe. Today felt different. She wasn't standing alone anymore. Officer Kane accused her of causing trouble before she had done anything wrong. She swallowed. He knocked the coffee from her hands. Another breath. He laughed while it spilled all over her. Tears began forming in her eyes. Then he threw her driver's license onto the ground. The governor never interrupted. Lila continued. "And he dumped everything out of her bag." She glanced down at the cracked glasses. "I've never seen anything like it." The narrative continues with the full revelation, investigation, and resolution as in the original, with times removed and names changed consistently. Governor Conrad Hale never took his eyes off the evidence. Neither did Nora Ellison. They watched the entire recording without interruption. When it ended, the silence felt heavier than before. Chief Victor Harlan immediately stepped forward. "Governor, I'd like to explain." Hale slowly turned. "I'm listening." Harlan forced himself to remain composed. Officer Kane clearly exercised poor judgment. Kane quickly nodded. "Yes, sir." Harlan continued. "But this was an isolated lapse in professionalism. We've already begun discussing internal disciplinary measures." Nora Ellison looked directly at him. "Internal?" Harlan hesitated. "Our department can address this appropriately." Nora calmly closed another folder. "Chief Harlan, This stopped being an internal matter the moment your officer violated a citizen's constitutional rights while multiple witnesses watched. Harlan tried another approach. Governor, emotions were running high. Celine finally spoke. My emotions never changed. Everyone looked toward her. She stood quietly beside the governor, her stained coat still carrying the marks of the assault. I remained respectful from the first word to the last. Sierra Blake zoomed her camera closer. Celine wasn't speaking like someone trying to win an argument. She was speaking like someone documenting history. Harlan realized the public was slipping away. He needed another explanation. There has been a misunderstanding about Senator Voss's identity. Celine gently shook her head. No. Harlan frowned. If we'd known, Celine interrupted him. That's exactly the point. Her voice remained calm. If you would have treated me differently because of my title, then you admit ordinary citizens receive less respect. No one answered. The sentence struck with devastating precision. Governor Hale slowly folded his arms. Chief Harlan. Harlan swallowed. Yes, Governor. Would Officer Kane have thrown that coffee if she had introduced herself as a United States Senator? Harlan opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Governor Hale asked again. Answer the question. No. The admission landed like a hammer. Celine looked around at the residents gathered along Main Street. Then today was never about me. She pointed gently toward the crowd. It was about every person standing here who doesn't travel with security, cameras, or public recognition. Several residents lowered their heads. Many had experienced exactly that. Walter Crowe stepped beside Celine. I spent decades wearing this uniform. He looked toward the younger deputies. A badge should make decent people feel safer. He turned toward Kane. Not smaller. Deputy Rafael Soto quietly removed his patrol cap. He stared at it for several seconds before speaking. I should have stopped this. Kane looked at him in disbelief. You've lost your mind. No. Soto looked back at his fellow officer. I lost my courage years ago. The words hit several deputies harder than they expected. Officer Avery Lang, who had remained silent since arriving at the scene, finally stepped forward. Governor Hale noticed her immediately. Officer. Avery drew a slow breath. I'd like to make a statement. Chief Harlan's eyes widened. Avery, she continued anyway. I was assigned to review civilian complaints. Nora Ellison opened a notebook. Go on. Avery looked directly at Celine. I recommended formal investigations into 3 complaints involving Officer Kane. The governor frowned. What happened? My recommendations disappeared. Harlan immediately interrupted. Those cases lacked evidence. Avery slowly reached into her patrol notebook. I kept copies. The entire street froze. She removed 3 neatly folded documents. I made them because I was afraid they'd vanish. Nora accepted the papers. The dates stretched back months. Each complaint described remarkably similar behavior. Humiliation, unlawful detention, threats, verbal abuse. Every report carried one signature recommending further investigation, Officer Avery Lang. Every recommendation bore another signature, denied, Chief Victor Harlan. Nora quietly handed the documents to Governor Hale. He read each page carefully. Then he looked up. Chief Harlan's confidence finally cracked. I can explain. I sincerely hope so. Meanwhile, Julian Crowe received another encrypted notification through his secure tablet. His expression changed instantly. Governor Hale noticed. What is it? Julian turned the screen toward him. Our forensic team has completed its remote review of the department's digital evidence system. Nora immediately understood. They accessed the server. Julian nodded. Yes. What did they find? Julian looked toward Chief Harlan. Someone attempted to permanently delete surveillance footage from the cafe's exterior security camera shortly after today's incident. Sierra Blake lowered her camera for the first time all afternoon. Even she hadn't expected that. Governor Hale's voice became noticeably colder. Was the deletion successful? Julian shook his head. No, sir. Why not? Our cyber investigators intercepted the request before the files were overwritten. Every face slowly turned toward Chief Harlan. The chief's breathing grew uneven. I never ordered anyone to delete anything. Julian calmly scrolled through another screen. The deletion request originated from a secure terminal inside the chief's administrative office. Harlan's face went pale, and it required your personal authorization code. Nobody spoke. There was nothing left to say. The attempt to erase the truth had failed, and in trying to hide today's misconduct, someone had uncovered something far larger. Nora Ellison quietly closed the final folder in her hands. Governor Conrad Hale looked at the growing stack of evidence: eyewitness testimony, deputy statements, recorded video, preserved complaints, recovered digital records, attempted evidence destruction. He slowly lifted his eyes toward Chief Victor Harlan. For the first time that afternoon, he wasn't looking at a police chief. He was looking at the man who had allowed an entire culture of abuse to flourish, and he had just reached his decision. No one on Main Street moved. Even the wind seemed to disappear. Governor Conrad Hale slowly closed the evidence folder in his hands before taking a deliberate step toward Celine Voss. The crowd instinctively made room, sensing that something extraordinary was about to happen. Officer Brendan Kane still clung to the hope that this could somehow be contained. Governor, he said quickly, I understand how this looks, but nobody here knew who she was. Hale stopped walking. His eyes settled on Kane with quiet disappointment. Officer Kane, he paused, you still don't understand. The governor turned toward the hundreds of residents now gathered along the sidewalks. This woman should never have needed a title to be treated with dignity. The words echoed across Main Street. Kane lowered his head. For the first time all afternoon, he had no reply. Governor Hale turned back toward Celine. Senator. The single word rippled through the crowd like a wave. What did he just say? Senator? Did he call her Senator? Sierra Blake swung her camera toward Celine just as every lens on Main Street followed. Governor Hale continued. It is my honor to introduce Senator Celine Voss. Gasps erupted everywhere. Lila Grant covered her mouth. Caleb Thorne stared in complete disbelief. Deputy Rafael Soto slowly closed his eyes. Officer Avery Lang whispered to herself, My God. Even Walter Crowe, who had suspected Celine was someone important, hadn't imagined this. The quiet woman whose belongings had been dumped onto the sidewalk, the woman who had never raised her voice, the woman who had patiently endured every insult, was one of the most respected legislators in the state. Kane took an involuntary step backward. No, his voice cracked. No, that's impossible. Celine finally spoke. It isn't. She reached into her leather tote and carefully removed a slim navy credential wallet. She opened it slowly. Inside rested her official Senate identification. The gold state seal shimmered beneath the afternoon sun. Every remaining doubt disappeared. Kane's face turned ghostly pale. His knees suddenly felt weak. Chief Victor Harlan looked as though all the strength had drained from his body. He whispered almost inaudibly, Senator, Celine gently closed the credential wallet. You didn't ask who I was. She looked directly at Kane. You decided who I was. Silence. She turned toward the crowd. I came to Maple Ridge without an escort because I wanted to experience exactly what an ordinary citizen would experience. She glanced toward the spilled coffee that still stained the pavement. Unfortunately, her voice softened, I found exactly what the letters described. Governor Hale nodded. Those letters reached my office months ago. He looked across the crowd. Anonymous citizens described intimidation, unlawful searches, racial profiling, disappearing complaints, and fear. He paused. We promised those citizens their voices would matter. Julian Crow stepped beside him. Today's visit was never scheduled on any public calendar. Nora Ellison continued. Only a handful of people in state government knew Senator Voss would be here. Chief Harlan slowly realized the devastating implication. This had not been bad luck. This had been a test, and his department had failed every part of it. Kane desperately searched for something to say. I wasn't targeting a senator. Celine answered immediately. No. She looked him directly in the eyes. You were targeting a woman you believed had no power. Her words struck harder than any accusation. Governor Hale turned toward the growing crowd. That difference matters. Several residents nodded, some wiping tears from their eyes. The governor continued. If public servants only respect people with titles, then they are no longer serving the public. Applause broke out. Soft at first, then louder. Soon, dozens of people were clapping, not because Celine was a senator, but because someone had finally said aloud what they had lived with for years. Sierra Blake captured every second. She knew this footage would dominate every evening broadcast in Georgia, perhaps beyond. Kane's breathing became increasingly uneven. He looked toward Chief Harlan. Harlan couldn't even meet his eyes. For years, Kane had believed the chief would always protect him. Now, the chief looked like a man trying to save himself. Governor Hale took another step forward. Chief Victor Harlan. Yes, Governor. I have one final question. Harlan swallowed. Of course. When Senator Voss requested your officer's badge number, yes. What did you do? Harlan lowered his head. I defended my officer without asking a single witness. Yes. Without reviewing any evidence? Yes. Without questioning whether a citizen had just been assaulted? Harlan's silence answered for him. Governor Hale looked toward Nora Ellison. Counselor. Nora opened a leather portfolio and removed a prepared executive document. I anticipated this possibility. Harlan stared at the paper. His heart began pounding. Governor Hale accepted the document, but did not sign it immediately. Instead, he turned once more toward Celine. Senator Voss. Celine met his eyes. Governor, I asked you to visit Maple Ridge because I needed the truth. You have it. I wish the outcome had been different. So do I. The governor slowly nodded. Then he faced the crowd. This investigation no longer concerns only Officer Kane. He lifted the unsigned executive order for everyone to see. It concerns the leadership that allowed this conduct to become acceptable. Chief Harlan closed his eyes. He already knew what the document contained. Across the street, reporters from 2 additional television stations arrived, cameras raised. State investigators quietly positioned themselves near the patrol vehicles. Several deputies instinctively stepped away from Kane. Others removed their body cameras and handed them voluntarily to investigators. The entire balance of power had shifted. The officers who once believed they controlled the story were now standing inside it. Governor Hale uncapped his pen. The scratching sound of its tip against the paper seemed impossibly loud. One signature, just one, and an entire era inside the Maple Ridge Police Department would come to an abrupt end. The scratching sound of Governor Conrad Hale's pen stopped. He lowered it onto the executive order and looked directly at Police Chief Victor Harlan. "Effective immediately," he announced, his voice carrying across the silent street. "You are relieved of your duties as chief of the Maple Ridge Police Department." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the reality of the words settled over the crowd. Victor Harlan stood frozen, his lips parting as if to argue. Nothing came out. He had imagined retirement. He had imagined commendations. He had imagined leaving the department with his reputation intact. He had never imagined losing everything on the sidewalk outside a neighborhood coffee shop. Governor Hale handed the signed order to Nora Ellison. "Please see that it is executed immediately." "Yes, Governor." Nora stepped toward Harlan. "Chief Harlan, under the authority vested in the governor's office, your law enforcement credentials are suspended pending further administrative and criminal review. Your department-issued firearm, badge, identification, and access credentials are to be surrendered immediately." Harlan looked around instinctively. He expected someone, anyone, to defend him. No one did. Not a deputy, not a supervisor, not even Brendan Kane. The men and women who had spent years following his orders now silently watched as he slowly unclipped the gold badge from his uniform. His hands trembled. He placed the badge into Nora Ellison's waiting hand. The metallic sound echoed through the stunned silence. For Victor Harlan, it sounded like the end of an entire career. Governor Hale then turned toward Julian Crow. "Director Crow, Governor, take custody of all departmental digital records." Julian nodded. "The cyber unit is already securing the servers." "What about body camera files?" "They're being mirrored to state evidence storage as we speak." Chief Harlan's head snapped upward. "You can't just seize departmental records." Nora calmly answered before anyone else could. "We already have." She held up a court order bearing a state judge's electronic authorization. The warrant was approved earlier. Harlan stared at the document. That meant the governor's office had anticipated obstruction before anyone even arrived. This operation had been planned with extraordinary precision. Brendan Kane suddenly stepped forward. "Governor, Hale raised one hand. "Officer Kane, do not interrupt." Kane stopped immediately. The confidence that had filled him earlier had completely vanished. His uniform suddenly felt heavier. His badge no longer felt like a symbol of authority. It felt like evidence. Nora Ellison opened another folder. "Officer Brendan Kane, yes. You are hereby placed on immediate administrative suspension without pay pending criminal and civil review." His breathing caught. "Suspension?" Nora looked directly into his eyes. "The investigation now includes possible assault, abuse of authority, unlawful search, civil rights violations, evidence tampering, and misconduct under color of law." Every charge sounded heavier than the one before. Kane looked desperately toward Governor Hale. "Sir, I made a mistake." Celine Voss quietly spoke for the first time in several minutes. "A mistake is spilling someone's coffee because you weren't paying attention." Everyone looked toward her. "What happened today," she continued, "required dozens of choices." She counted them calmly. "You chose to mock me. You chose to humiliate me. You chose to throw my identification onto the ground. You chose to search my belongings without cause. You chose to threaten witnesses." She paused. "And someone chose to erase the evidence." No one argued because no one could. Sierra Blake kept filming. She knew millions of viewers would eventually hear those words, not because they were dramatic, but because they were undeniably true. Governor Hale stepped beside Celine. "Senator Voss," she turned toward him, "I asked you to trust this investigation." "I did." "I owe you an apology." Celine gently shook her head. "You owe it to the people of Maple Ridge." The governor looked toward the residents gathered along both sidewalks. She was right. This had never been about one elected official. It had always been about ordinary citizens whose complaints had disappeared into filing cabinets and forgotten databases. Walter Crowe slowly removed an old photograph from his wallet. The edges had faded with time. He handed it to Governor Hale. "This was taken on my first day wearing the badge." The governor examined it. A much younger Walter stood smiling beside his academy instructor. "I kept this with me for decades," Walter said. "Why?" "To remind myself that the badge belongs to the people." He looked toward Kane. never to the officer wearing it. Deputy Rafael Soto quietly stepped forward. Governor. Yes, Deputy. I'd like to submit a full written statement. Nora Ellison smiled faintly. We were hoping you would. Officer Avery Lang joined him. So would I. Then another deputy raised his hand. And me. A fourth followed. So will I. Chief Harlan watched in disbelief. The wall of silence he had spent years building was collapsing in front of him, not because people suddenly became brave, but because someone had finally shown them that the truth would be protected. Julian Crow's phone vibrated once more. He glanced down before handing it to Governor Hale. Our forensic team completed the server recovery. The governor read the report. Then he looked toward Nora. How many deleted complaints? Nora scanned the screen. 37 recovered. Julian added quietly, and 21 body camera recordings previously listed as unavailable. The crowd gasped. Lila Grant covered her mouth. So all those people were telling the truth. Celine looked toward her. I believed them the day they wrote those letters. Governor Hale slowly folded the report. Then today marks more than the end of one police chief's career. He looked across the officers, standing in stunned silence. It marks the beginning of rebuilding public trust. State investigators approached Kane. One investigator spoke professionally. Officer Kane, you'll accompany us for questioning. Kane didn't resist. As he walked past Celine, he stopped for a brief moment. He searched for words. None came. Celine looked at him with neither anger nor triumph, only quiet sadness. I hope one day, she said softly, you'll understand that the badge was never meant to make you feel bigger. She glanced toward the residents of Maple Ridge. It was meant to help everyone else feel safe. Kane lowered his eyes. Without another word, he continued walking toward the waiting state vehicle. Behind him, the people of Maple Ridge watched the scene unfold. For the first time in years, they weren't watching power silence the truth. They were watching the truth finally hold power accountable. Later, the town of Maple Ridge looked strangely different. The sidewalks were the same. The storefronts hadn't changed. The coffee shop still opened every morning before sunrise. But something invisible had shifted. For years, residents had walked past the police station without looking at it. Now they paused. They watched state investigators carrying boxes of files through the front doors while independent auditors cataloged evidence inside. The investigation had expanded far beyond anyone's expectations. Previously dismissed citizen complaints had been formally reopened. Missing body camera recordings had been recovered. Supervisors were placed on administrative leave pending review. The state attorney general's office announced a criminal inquiry into evidence tampering and abuse of authority. News crews from across Georgia continued arriving in Maple Ridge, transforming the once-forgotten town into the center of a statewide conversation about accountability. Inside the governor's office, another meeting was underway. Governor Conrad Hale stood before reporters with Senator Celine Voss beside him. Behind them hung the seal of the state of Georgia. Today's announcement was not about politics, it was about trust. Governor Hale stepped to the podium. One citizen was publicly humiliated because an officer believed power gave him permission to disregard dignity. He paused. Today, we acknowledge something even more important. He turned toward Celine. That citizen happened to be a state senator. The room remained silent. But our response would have been the same had she been a teacher, a mechanic, a nurse, a retiree, or anyone else. Celine smiled slightly. That sentence, she said, is exactly why this investigation mattered. The governor continued, effective immediately, every law enforcement agency under state oversight will implement mandatory annual constitutional rights training, expanded body camera retention requirements, and an independent civilian complaint review system. Reporters rapidly typed notes. Camera shutters echoed throughout the room. Another reporter raised her hand. Governor, why did Senator Voss travel without announcing who she was? Celine stepped toward the microphone herself. Because respect should never depend on recognition. She looked directly into the cameras. If the only people treated fairly are those with influence, then justice has already failed. Her words spread across television broadcasts that evening. By the next morning, millions of people had watched the footage from Maple Ridge, not because a senator had been insulted, but because viewers saw themselves in the quiet woman who refused to surrender her dignity. Back in Maple Ridge, Lila Grant unlocked the front door of the coffee shop just before opening. A handwritten note had been taped to the window overnight. Thank you for speaking when others were afraid. No signature, no return address, just gratitude. She smiled before carefully folding the note and placing it inside the register. Business had never been stronger. Customers traveled from neighboring counties simply to meet the young manager who had chosen courage over convenience. Later that afternoon, Celine quietly returned to the cafe. Not as a senator, simply as Celine. Lila immediately recognized her. I was hoping you'd come back. Celine smiled. I promised myself I would. Lila handed her a fresh cup of coffee. This one's on the house. Celine laughed softly. I think I should pay this time. You already have. Celine looked puzzled. What do you mean? You reminded an entire town that silence isn't the same as peace. Neither woman spoke for a moment. The memory of that painful afternoon lingered between them. Then Lila noticed something. You bought a new pair of glasses. Celine smiled. I did. What happened to the old ones? Celine reached into her tote and carefully removed the cracked glasses from their case. I kept them. Why? So I never forget what happened here. Lila nodded. They're a reminder. No. Celine gently shook her head. They're a responsibility. Across town, Walter Crowe stood outside the police station beside a newly installed sign. Community Listening Center. The building that had once received complaints only to bury them would now host monthly public meetings between residents and law enforcement leadership. Walter smiled quietly. He never imagined he would live long enough to witness such a change. Nearby, Deputy Rafael Soto, now assigned to the department's Ethics and Community Relations unit during the restructuring, approached him. I almost resigned, Soto admitted. Walter looked at him. But you didn't. I realized leaving would have been easier than helping rebuild. Walter placed a reassuring hand on the younger man's shoulder. The badge didn't fail. He glanced toward the station. People did, and people can choose differently. Later, Officer Avery Lang was promoted to interim captain after her honesty and integrity became central to the department's rebuilding efforts. Sierra Blake received a statewide journalism award for her reporting. Caleb Thorne was awarded a Civic Leadership Scholarship after refusing to destroy the video that helped reveal the truth. As for Victor Harlan, formal administrative proceedings permanently ended his law enforcement career. Brendan Kane faced criminal charges, civil litigation, and the loss of his certification as a police officer. Neither man blamed the evidence anymore. Deep down, they knew the evidence had only exposed decisions they had willingly made. One quiet afternoon, Celine returned to Main Street once again. She stood in the exact spot where hot coffee had soaked her coat. Children laughed nearby. Neighbors greeted one another without lowering their voices when patrol cars passed. The fear that had once settled over Maple Ridge had begun to lift. Governor Hale joined her quietly. Do you think justice won? Celine looked toward families walking peacefully down the sidewalk. Justice isn't a finish line, she smiled. It's a promise we have to keep making. The governor nodded. I'm glad you answered my call that day. Celine looked towards the cafe. I'm glad the people of Maple Ridge answered theirs. As the afternoon sun settled over Main Street, the place that had once witnessed humiliation now stood as proof that dignity could outlast cruelty, that courage could awaken a silent community, and that even the smallest act of truth could change an entire system when enough people finally chose to stand together. Every person deserves respect long before anyone learns their title, wealth, or position. Real justice begins when we protect the dignity of strangers as fiercely as we would protect our own. If this story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us where you're watching from and subscribe for more inspiring stories about courage, compassion, and justice.